In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to have the character, when he falls into holes, the game restarts, and we're also going to cover how to prevent the character from getting stuck to the walls when he jumps against them. So if I press play and take a look at this, we can see that as the character walks, and he walks into a wall and he jumps against it, he's not getting stuck to the wall. Unity has an issue with collision. If you're holding the directional arrow against the wall and he gets stuck, we're going to cover how to fix that. And we're also going to cover when he walks off the edge and he falls into a hole, the game restarts over back where he started from. So we're going to cover how to do those two things. Alright, so let me open up a new scene. Let's close out this. Okay, and so here we have the last time we worked with this, the jumping scene. So let me pull up the scenes, jumping. Alright, so here we have the character. Let me slide this up a little higher. Alright, so where we last left off with, we have the character who can walk around left and right, and he can jump. So we have all that covered, but when he falls off the edge, he just keeps falling, and it just doesn't end. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is put some kind of end or kill zone or restart zone or something that will start the character over again. So let's jump over to, I guess we can either put a sprite in there for the ground. Let's put this in scene mode. So we need something down here that will start the game over. I'm just going to put, let's say, a blank one in there. So to do that, you just go to create. You can create an empty. This empty will pop on your screen. If you have the move arrow or move tool selected, you'll see where it is. It's an empty object. There's nothing that exists in it. It's just empty. So think of it like a folder or a container. You could put a sprite down here and just turn off the sprite so you don't see it in the game. But either way, if you add component, physics 2D, and you could do a box collider if you want, you could do an edge collider, whatever option you prefer to use. I'm going to click on edge, for example, and let's say we'll take this edge, which is pretty small over here, go to edit mode, zoom out, I'll grab this corner, pull it out to about here, and grab the other corner and pull it out to about there. So let's just assume that's the length of my entire level. If you want it longer, you can. You can also adjust where the restart zone will be. Let's Control Z that out. Alright, so I have this, uncheck edit, and so I'm going to call this game object my restart. You can call it whatever you want. It's just basically what's going to restart the game over again. Alright, so if I press play now, and I take the character and I walk him off to the edge, he'll land on the restart zone. So it's not restarting the game yet, but at least it's recognizing the character is colliding with it. So let's go put some code on this to tell it what happens when the character hits it. We can either put the code on the collider. In this case, is one less code sitting on the character. And if you want to have multiple collisions, you just add this code on there again. But if you put it on the character, then you won't have to. Let's say you had spikes over here and the character hits the spikes and restarts the game, you would have one code on the character when you wouldn't have to put it on every unique thing. But you could put it on all those different pieces either to keep it off the character. Either way, I'm going to put it on the character, for example. So let's say I click on the character, the one in the scene, and I go to add another code. So right now I have 1, 2, 3 different codes. So again, you can put it on the object you want, if you want. But I'll put on the character, we'll go for Playmaker, Playmaker FSM, and let's go into edit mode on this. So now I have a new FSM. I can either name it here or name the FSM right here. Let's call this, I guess restart should work. So we'll call it restart. You can see it updated the name here. Let's click on state 1, and I'm going to call state 1 fell in hole, just so I know what happened. So this is the state where it fell into the hole. So on this one, we need to put a collision detection on here. Collision 2D event. So the collision 2D event, we'll double click on this, pops it in here. We're going to say on collision enter, so the character is entering, because we're already on the character. So he's entering a collision event, and we're going to send event. We don't have any right now. So I'm going to right click on here, add transition, and go to finished. So we now have a finished event. Alright, so when he collides with the collision, he'll go to the next state. We don't know what collision he's colliding with, though. He could be colliding with anything. So we need to specifically tell it what collision he's hitting. So we're going to use a tag for that. And right now we don't have any tags to choose from. We could switch out to this setting right here, since we're not using a variable per se. Switch out by using this little double line box. And now we can pick from existing tags that are already in the scene. I could use respawn. That could also indicate where he's going to pop in the scene from. Or I can make my own tag. So I'm going to add a tag. And I'm going to call, or I already have one called ground, so I'm going to click plus so I can add a new one. And I'm going to call this one, I guess, restart. Alright, so restart is a new tag that I have. So if I click back on the character, I should have the option to click on the restart tag. So now when he hits something tagged as restart, he'll go to the end of the event. So I need to click on this restart collision that I drew and tag it. So it says untagged right now. So I'm going to click on this one and click on restart. This will tell this line that this is a restart tag, so that when the character hits anything tagged as restart, he'll go to the finished state. So the finished state will then move us over to, let's right click and add a new state. I'm going to take the finished and drag it to the next state. And let's click on the state and call it something like, I guess, restart level. Alright, so the character hits this, we'll restart the level. Let's go over here to restart level. And that's pretty much all there is. It just restarts the level. So now if he hits that line, it'll restart the game, or the level he's on. So I press play right now. And when the character walks off the edge, he'll hit the line and the level restarts. So simple as that. We don't have any health at the moment to worry about that. So for right now, wherever he walks off, whenever he hits that line, boom, it restarts. Now, for example, let's make this a little more detailed. If he falls off the edge, rather than the camera following him down, he just trails around and immediately pops out here. The viewer should recognize that he fell off the edge, but it might help better to, let's say, pause the game. So if we wanted to do that, let's say we move over to the, move back to the, not move, but the restart state, or restart FSM that we're on. Alright, so let's add a new state in between there. Let's move this over here and add a new state in between there. And I'm going to call this new state pause game. So let's say we pause the game. I'm going to drag this one over to pause game. So when you hit the collision, we're going to go to pause, the pause state, and we're going to add on here, let's say, wait. So I'm going to grab the wait and drop it in here. And wait time is 1 second right now, so I'll leave it at 1 second. I'm going to click on finished again. There is no finished state, so let's right click, add transition finished. So now there is a finished state, and we can drag this to restart the level. So now when he hits the collision line, the game will pause for 1 second, and then it'll restart the level. So let's check that out. So the character walks over here, falls off the edge, and it takes a second for the game to restart. So let's walk off this side so you can see the ground a little more. So he walks over here, falls off the edge, and you can see I'm walking, and then eventually 1 second later the game restarts. Cool. But the downside is I'm still walking and I'm still in control, and so it looks like I'm walking on this invisible line on the ground. It's kind of like, why am I here before I finally restart? So the idea of pausing sounds really cool, but let's go one more step further. Let's freeze the character so that when he hits, everything stops, so you can't move anymore, and that really signifies the player that, oh, I fell in a hole, I can't move, now it's going to restart. So let's go back to the character, the restart FSM. Alright, so let's add one more thing on the pause game. So in addition to pausing, let's go and freeze the character. So let's set his velocity. So set velocity 2D, drag this over here, and let's say the user object, the owner is the character, so we can leave that. The vector, x and y and all that, let's go for the x value. The y, since he's not moving left or up and down, he's just moving left and right, we're going to set this from none uncheck this and just leave it at 0. So his x is going to be turned into 0, so he can't move left and right because his velocity is set to 0. And you want to do this every frame. If you only do this the one time, for a fraction of a second he'll be paused, but then after that he's free to move left and right. So we'll do this every frame, so his x velocity is always 0, so you can't move left and right, so he's basically frozen at that point. So we have that set to 0, and then while he's frozen, it'll wait and go over to restart after a second. So let's try this now. So he walks over to the edge, and eventually when he reaches the edge, the game will freeze, and you can see I can still twist left and right, but I can't do anything else. The game basically freezes, and I can't jump. He's just like locked in position. So that's cool and all, but then the other problem is you're kind of stuck there, and the camera followed me down. So if we could make the camera not follow, so as soon as you walk up the edge, the camera just kind of stays put and you fall off the edge of the screen and then it pauses, that would be even more realistic to show that you fell off, the game's paused, and then we're going to restart. So in order to do that, since the code works all with restarting the game, we need to make the camera follow the character, which it's already doing. So if I walk left and right, you can see that the box on the screen is constantly following the character, which is cool. And we did it easily by taking the main camera and parenting it to the character so it constantly follows him. But we're going to change the follow method a little bit so that when he falls off the edge, the camera is limited, that it can't keep following him. It's going to try, but it can't. So to do that, we're going to put code on the camera itself. So we're going to take the camera, we're going to drag the camera outside of the character so it's no longer parented. And quick example of what that means, since the camera is not part of the character, when I walk left and right, the camera doesn't move anymore. The camera is frozen because it's not following anything. It's not glued to the character. So we're going to put some code on the camera now. So let's add component while we're selected in the camera. Go to Playmaker, Playmaker FSM, and now we're in the code section. So for the code, to follow the character, we're going to go with, let's change the first state to follow. So the camera's going to follow the player. So the code we're going to use for that one is move towards. So we're going to drag this in here. So we're going to move towards, and the user owner is the camera itself. So the game object is the user, the camera. We'll move towards the target, and now we have to pick what the target is. So if I click this little bullet point there, I can go over to scene, click on the character, and say this is the character I want to follow. So the camera, the owner, will follow the target, the character. All right, so that's set up. So now it should move. So if I press play, the camera will automatically find the player, and it should follow him, but the problem is it found him once. If you noticed, as soon as the game starts, the camera moves, finds him, and then after that it's found him, it doesn't continue to follow him anymore. It's like tag. I tagged you, cool, I'm done, I don't need to move anymore. So we need to tell the camera, keep moving even after you've hit the player. So in order to do that, we're going to go right-click, add transition, finished. So what happens when the player, or the camera tags the player? We're going to say finished, goes back to itself. So it repeats. So it's constantly repeating the finished state of tag the player, keep going, tag the player, keep going. So finished event right here, we're going to say finished. So when it's finished, it repeats. So let's press play again. So now as I move, you can see the camera went a little crazy in the screen here, but it's still following the player in the scene mode. So you can see wherever I walk, the camera is going with me. So cool, perfect. We just need to fix it in the scene mode, which can be rather frustrating, but it's an easy fix. We'll just take the z-axis. The z is basically coming towards us, x is horizontal, y is vertical, z is the depth going into the screen and away. So we're going to put a -2 on that. You might have to pick different numbers depending on what layer your character's on and how much depth he has, but 2 should be far enough away towards us that it should work. So let's try -2. We'll press play, and when the camera finds us, it should stay locked on us. It looks like the number got reset right here. Sometimes that happens when you're in play mode. It doesn't stay permanently locked, which is super frustrating. But see, setting it to -2 will retain the look of that. So if I go back to move, oops, the camera now follows me. So if you get that glitch sometimes the what you typed in doesn't follow into play mode. It's when I unpause it, it should work. So yeah, for some reason it's resetting. It's not actually keeping the numbers. Rather frustrating. All right, so -2 should have that. Sometimes you can click off on multiple objects and then back, and then sometimes it'll actually retain it when you press play. Doesn't always happen, but in this case it did. Awesome. So the camera follows. Yay, thank God. All right, cool. So let's pause that. So we have the -2, so the camera is towards us on the screen. Another note you might have noticed was a slight little lag. It's not very noticeable, but if you're moving around, the camera, I guess, is pretty accurate. The camera can lag a little bit. If you want the camera to quickly find you, you can change the max speed to something higher. You can put the max speed excessively fast, like 1,000. 100 is probably good enough. But whatever you put it at, let's say you press play now, the camera should follow your position a whole lot faster. Looks like, again, it reset back to 10. But yeah, so the camera should be like perfectly in sync wherever your every move is. Won't have any lag between times. All right, so let's unpause that. Click back on the camera. All right, so we'll set that back to 100. Click on a few things. Hopefully it stays. All right, so we have that set. The next thing is, the problem is, let's say, even though the camera does follow us again, we go back into the hole. We want the camera to stop at this point so it doesn't follow us down the hole. So now we're going to limit the position of the camera. So going back to the main camera, clicking on here, we want to add a couple more things. We need to find out what the position of the camera is and what it's told to not pass. So we're going to get position and drag this down here underneath of the move towards. So right down there. Get position of the user owner, which is the camera itself, and we're going to set a variable. We don't have one to pick, so we're going to make one. So we're going to the variable section, type in height, and float is fine, so we'll add that. So we just added the height variable onto the camera FSM. I can name the camera FSM as well. Call this, instead of FSM, call this camera follow. So I know what this FSM is. It's called a camera follow now. Anyway, so going back to the state, we have the get position. Y is going to be stored as the height. So the camera's height of Y is stored as the variable height every frame. So wherever it's going, it always knows how high it is on the Y direction. Cool. So the next thing we want to do is add another option. We're going to float compare. We're going to drag this underneath of the get position so it finds out what the position is, and then it's going to compare it. So we're going to compare, switch this out with the double lines to height. So we're going to take the height and compare this to whatever number best fits your game. So in my case, it's -1. So if 0 is this line right here, which is the center line, right now the character is sitting around +1, and the camera is sitting around, I guess, half as well. So if we go -1, the camera's little center cursor will stop at -1 and won't go any further down. So at this point, if it stops here, we'll still be able to see -2, -3 based on how far the overlap is, but after that, -3, the camera screen won't go past the edge of this bottom line, so we won't see the character fall any further. So depending on what number you pick here will determine how far down the camera will be allowed to go. So we're going to say when the height of the camera relative to -1 is less than, so we'll go to finished. So if, actually no, we want something else besides finished. But if the camera's height is less than -1, we'll check this every frame. We need a new transition. So we'll add transition we need to name one also. So we'll go to events, and we're going to call this event, I guess we'll call it stop. So we'll call it stop and go to right click, add transition, and stop. So we now have a finished and a stop. Finished means it'll keep following. Stop, we'll go back to the float compare and say stop. So the camera will stop moving if the height of the camera reaches -1. It'll move again if it's less than -1, so cool, but if it's less than, it stops. So let's right click, add a new state. So this state we're going to call stop. So the stop transition will go to the stop state, and on the stop state, what are we going to do? We're going to set position of the camera, so the camera knows what to do. So when it reaches this state, the Y, we don't need to set a variable, we just need to set it to -1. So as long as the camera is trying to go below -1, let's say it wants to go to -2, this is setting it back to -1. And this will occur every, actually you shouldn't have to do this every frame, it should just lock in this state. And that should be about it. So as long as the camera is trying to go below -1, it'll constantly put it back at 1. Actually, we need it finished on there as well. So add transition, finish. So as soon as it finishes this, as soon as it sets it back to -1, it goes back here. If you click every frame, it'll kind of freeze it and lock it on this one, I think. But this should work now. So the camera follows the player wherever he's going. As you can see, it's still lit up green because it's constantly chasing the character. As soon as the character falls off and the screen goes -1, it froze the screen and locked it. In this case, I might want to go for -2 because I could still see the player's head. Let's try that again. So I fall off, I can still see his head a little bit. So let's change the camera height a little bit lower. So if the camera height is -2, actually -0.5, or actually -1 probably is fine. Let's just move the restart line a little bit lower. So I'll take the restart line down to here so the character falls further and so you don't see his head. So that should be fine. So I walk over here. The character is about to fall off the edge, and as soon as he falls off, the game freezes, and then it restarts back over here. So if I fall off here, the camera stops, and you don't see it, and restarts. So now we have the effect that the character, or the player made a mistake, everything froze, and then boom, you restart. So you have a full kind of restarting effect built into the game. Alright, and that should mostly finish up those two options. We'll do one more thing. We're going to cover how to prevent the character from sticking to the walls. In order to do that, let me go and import a wall sprite that I've drawn. Let's go over to this one. So I have a new atlas. I put both on the same atlas at this point. I'll drag this into the sprites folder. And let's take a look at that. The environment atlas is at the moment one piece. If I were to drop this in here, I'm going to get both kind of glued together. I don't really want both at once. So I'm going to slice this up. So while on this in project mode, if we go to single and set it to multiple, press apply. So we're telling it there's multiple images in the sprite atlas. We'll go to sprite editor, and automatic should be fine enough. Slice, you can see that it slices both of them out cleanly. We'll close that, we'll apply it, and so now inside of the Sprite Environment Atlas I have both of these. I have the wall and I have the original platform. This one's clear and this one's blurry. The reason is because it's a small little thumbnail. If I were to enlarge the screen, you can see its actual full clarity, but it's just blurring it because it's kind of small in the preview. Alright, so if I want to rename this, it might make it easier to, oops, close that. If I want to rename this, I can actually see the rename option. Oh well, because I can't rename it from here. Kind of strange. Alright, so we'll take this and I'll drag this wall into here, and I'll name this in the wall, or in this scene as wall, so I know what this is. I'll put this wall up against the side of here, so I have something to work with. And if I were to press play at this point, and I walk over here, you can see that it's, oops, there's no collision. Game restarts. Let's put collision in the sky. Again, you can put whatever type of collision you want, whether it's box collider, edge collider. I'm going to go box collider because there's a little bit of thickness. I'm going to adjust the collision on the box by going over to here and say edit collider and pull this in, pull this in, pull this, oops, edit, pull this down, oh my gosh, edit, there we go, pull that down and pull that up. Got to be careful grabbing those edges. Alright, unselect that, so now there's collision, and if I were to press play at this point, and the character were to jump up against the wall, he gets stuck to the wall as long as I'm holding the arrow key. If I let go, he'll start falling, and if I hold it again, he'll get locked again. So we want to fix this getting stuck to the wall issue. In order to fix this, it's relatively simple. All we have to do is put a slippery material on the character or the wall. It doesn't matter which one you put it on. If you put it on the wall, you have to put it on every wall so that they all have slipperiness. This way you can selectively pick which ones are going to be slippery. But if you put on the character, then everything's going to be slippery to him, so that's probably the easier option. To do that, we need to apply slippery material. So in the project setting, we go to Create, Physics 2D material. So we don't want to do a regular material and not just a physics material. We want a physics 2D material because we're in a 2D game. And this will automatically make a slippery material. I'm just going to call this slippery so I know what it is. So we have the slippery material, and the only two things you have on the slippery material is friction and bounciness. Friction is your basically getting stuckness, is how strong is the glue based on gravity and all that stuff. I'm going to say the friction is 0. So there is no friction, there is nothing that's going to hold the player against this material, so he's just going to slip right off. So with a 0 slipperiness, I'm going to click back on the character and scroll down to the colliders that I have, and I have 2 colliders on them, the box and the square. And right here where it says Material, Physics, Material 2D, I'm going to take the slippery, drag it onto here, and now he has slippery material on the circle and slippery on the square. And cool, that should be all we need. If I press play at this point, the ground doesn't affect him, which is awesome, but the wall, he won't slip on the wall anymore. So no matter how many times I jump, he doesn't get stuck to the wall. And that's relatively simple, all we need to do and worry about for preventing getting stuck on the walls. There's one more thing to note. If for some reason you wanted to use, let's say, one of these ground things and you wanted to reuse it, so Control D to duplicate, let's say we rotate this up. I'll put it right here. So you can reuse these if you want to reuse them. And you can jump over here to this one, and you still have it's because of a slight angle, you can kind of like push yourself up it. If I were to readjust this a little bit, let's say, so it's definitely not leaning. So I should be able to jump up against this, and cool, it works just like the other wall. The only difference here, if I jump against this one and jump again, I can keep jumping. So in other words, I can wall jump if I keep jumping and jump all the way over it. What happened here, even though they both have slippery material because of the character, the difference is this is tagged as ground because it's a ground object. This is how it knows the character is jumping because we tagged ground elements with a ground tag. The wall over here doesn't have a ground tag because it's a wall, but because I reused the ground, in this case you might do this sometimes, you might reuse the ground if you have like stone blocks and you want the same stone blocks you walked on to also be on the wall. Make sure that they don't have the ground tag, otherwise having the ground tag means that the player is told that he's allowed to jump off the wall, and if you time it right you can really gain some height jumping off that wall. So something to take into account, that if you are going to reuse a tile that you've used for the ground, make sure you untag that from being the ground so that when you play he doesn't have the ability to jump off walls. Now if you do want him to jump off walls, then you could do that. But as you can see here, without that ground tag, you can't jump off the wall anymore. And that's pretty much all there is. It is a neat effect if you do want jumping off the walls, but in most cases you probably don't want that because you'll jump kind of really high. you notice from this view, you can really gain some height. So it's not quite the best idea, but that should work with that. Cool. And hopefully that all makes sense. We covered how to put how to restart the game, fall in the hole, and the camera follow you, and how to fix the stickiness of the walls.